Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast here at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I am your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined by managing editor of the American Mind, Mike Sabo, and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books, Spencer Klavan. Well, there's only one thing that our corners of the right is talking about right now, so we have to talk about it, which is Kevin Roberts' video, the president of the Heritage Foundation. He released a video, I believe it was on Friday, in which he defended his friend Tucker Carlson for having on Nick Fuentes on his podcast. And it's been a roiling PR problem for Kevin and Heritage ever since. People took issue with him saying he would always be friends with Tucker Carlson, which led a lot of us to ask, that means no matter what he says going forward. I want to make a few points about this and to offer at the outset, this is not an institutional statement from the Claremont Institute. It's just us talking about news on the podcast. So I want to lay out some general principles and then see what Mike and Spencer had to say about it. I know they've both watched the interminably long Fuentes interview with Tucker for your benefit, so you don't have to. So let's get into it. I think first on Fuentes, I think it should be easy for many on the right to say, and I've been saying it for years internally, that though Fuentes may have a growing following amongst the young right, especially the young male right, I'm not sure how large it is. It's actually something that we should try to figure out through some polling or otherwise. And B, he has always been an ignoramus. He's an entertainer. He's not a serious thinker or a serious person. He's also, just taking him at his own statements and how he talks about things, an anti-Semitic weasel. So he shouldn't really be taken seriously. The phenomenon of him is interesting because he seems to have a decent amount of traction on the young right. But again, I reserve judgment about how large that faction is. There's a decent chance it's, I guess last week I would have said, maybe hoping beyond hope, that it's 50,000 people online across the Atlantic. I think it's probably bigger than that from what I hear from our friends who've made a bit of a study of this. So Tucker had Fuentes on, and Fuentes tried to go a little softer than he usually does, but still found time to talk about organized Jewry and other nonsense. So that's enough about Fuentes. Tucker, I think it should be easy for us on the right to say about Tucker that over the last, 8 months, 10 months or so, whether it's softball interviews to the Iranian president or the Qatari prime minister or the business with Putin, which is a little longer ago now than 10 months, I think, and now Fuentes and Candace Owens, just asking questions about whether dinosaurs exist and that sort of thing.
Whoa. I've been with you on everything up. I have to stop you here, Ryan. The dinosaur question is a completely separate issue. My utter contempt and disdain for all the figures you have so far mentioned, notwithstanding, and it is severe, and I'm with you on everything else. I just want to leave open the door that we're not so, there's been a lot of leaps from those fossils to a lot of
Okay. Topic for another day? I don't think so. Not on this podcast.
Separate issue.
Yeah, Tucker, through his choice of guests, has been sowing a lot of division on the right lately, and I think that ought to be acknowledged, and it's a problem. What else to say about Tucker? I think Tucker is good when he has on people like our friends Warren Cass to talk about his project at American Compass on an economics policy that's good for the working and middle class. I think that's a completely valid and interesting development on the new policy right. And Warren is a smart guy and has built an impressive organization in a pretty short period of time, and is a patriot and a thoughtful guy. When he has our colleague Chris Caldwell on to talk about Muslim immigration in Europe and the risks it poses for the UK and elsewhere, another very good interview. That was pretty recent. So Tucker good when he has Caldwell and Cass on. Tucker very unhelpful at the very least, when he has folks like Candace Owens on, and then, sanitizing and trying to mainstream Fuentes, it should be baffling to all friends of America and the right. And we should, of course, try to correct Tucker on that front. We'll see where he goes over the coming months. I mean, I'm not a great consumer of Tucker recently, partly because of a lot of this. Well, there's only so many hours in the day. And when he has on cranks and conspiracy theorists, he's not worth our time. But I did watch Caldwell, and a friend of ours reminded me that Cass was on and is worth watching, so I'll watch Oren Cass on Tucker as well. Kevin Roberts, Kevin is a friend. He's a good man. Anyone who's known him for any period of time knows that he's not some sort of crypto anti-Semite. I realize opinions differ on the question of whether he should lose his job or not. That's something he's dealing with, this crisis internally with his senior management team, and that's a question for his board of directors. I don't think this is a firing offense. I think it was a mistake, and Kevin's been trying to clean it up. And so I think everyone should watch that. I would just say that I've been saying this privately, Kevin, I think, is the best president of the Heritage Foundation since Ed Follner. He's taken the organization that in some ways was, and is in parts of it, still beholden to an older GOP in a different time in America, and tried to modernize it and tried to make it more effective, and has tried to help the right side in what the Claremont Institute scholars and others have called a bit of a cold civil war in our domestic politics. So he should stay in that fight. And I suspect if he weathers the week, he'll be here for years to come. But it's something to watch. Finally, I should say the reaction to his video. Audience members of this podcast, your traction may vary on this, or your mileage may vary. But a lot of us who have friends and allies, and a lot of, for us, the Claremont Institute former fellows who are pretty online and engaged in public debate and are Jewish, I think it's hard to appreciate the level of invective they've been subjected to over the last 6 months, but really since October 7th, to the extent that they've voiced an opinion on the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or otherwise have offered opinions about the scene. I think of a few of our fellows in general, because I've been talking to some of them about this. Josh Hammer is one who's been subject to this abuse sort of endlessly over the last 6 months. Marjorie Taylor Greene waded into this fight recently. Josh wrote, whatever you think of Josh's opinion about the heritage thing or anything else, he wrote a piece decrying what he thinks is Tucker Carlson's bad turn over the last couple of years for, I think, the Daily Mail, but don't quote me on that. And Josh said that we need to neutralize this sort of growing wink, wink, nod, nod anti-Semitism. That's how Josh perceives Tucker's turn. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's response to that is, Josh Hammer calls for the murder of Tucker Carlson because of the term neutralize. So this sort of thing has been going on a lot. And so we should acknowledge it and realize that that group of our friends who are in the fight and doing good work in many areas, whether it's in public opinion, policy work, media stuff, or whatever, they were primed perfectly by Groyper dipshits online to respond to this in a way that's perfectly predictable. So my plea, I guess, for everyone would be to have a little more empathy and goodwill to those who have earned your empathy and goodwill. And I submit that Kevin Roberts has earned a lot of goodwill, whereas Nick Fuentes, of course, has not. I think that's all I'll say, but I will let Mike and Spencer get into some of the details of the last 4 days, which have been turbulent, to say the least.
No, I think the question of audience, Ryan, is a good one. Just, how far of a reach does Nick Fuentes have? I did some just sleuthing, so I asked Grok about this, and Grok says that as of March 2025, his audience across multiple platforms, so this is Rumble, there's a platform too that he created himself, is about 724,000 But recent growth, I guess he's gained about 100,000 followers on X since June 2025. So about in aggregate, he has about 1 million followers. So how does that translate to influence in public policy, to voting patterns? There's still a lot that I think needs to be, looked into and said about that. But at least he has some following of some size. He certainly has an army of gripers online who go after people right and left. I recently, actually, it was last night, he had a live stream, and there were about 60,000 live viewers, and that was his first show post Tucker. So that gives you at least some indication of his reach. I would say probably, obviously, I think we all share, our views of Fuentes as a horror, an important guy for certain, and just a clown. But there are certainly, obviously, there are people listening to him. So what should we do, with that crowd? Is gatekeeping, being boxed out, kind of the same traps that the establishment did, say, prior to Trump's rise to try to keep Trump out? No, I think we should have these conversations in the open. I think we should allow these people to say, hey, like, I understand you're listening to Nick Fuentes, but here's a better way. We have to offer guidance. We have to offer wisdom. We have to understand, look, people are listening to this guy as much as we may dislike him, and we have to offer an alternative. I think that's kind of the main point, I think, that comes out of this is, like Lincoln has a great quote from the Temperance Address, and I'll just read it kind of all the way through at this paragraph. I think this just perfectly encapsulates how rhetoric works, how public opinion works, and how you actually draw people to your own side. So this is Temperance Address, 1842. It is an old and true maxim that a drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. So with men, if you would win a man to your cause, first convince him that you are his sincere friend. Therein is a drop of honey that catches his heart, which, say what he will, is the great highroad to his reason, and which, when once gained, you will find but little trouble in convincing his judgment of the justice of your cause, if indeed that cause really be a just one. On the contrary, assume to dictate to his judgment, or to command his action, or to mark him as one to be shunned and despised, and he will retreat within himself, close all avenues to his head and his heart, and though your cause be naked truth itself, transformed to the heaviest lance, harder than steel, sharper than steel can be made, and though you throw it with more than Herculean force and precision, you shall be no more able to pierce him than to penetrate the hard shell of a tortoise with a rye straw. So I think that is just wisdom we all need to follow. Again, we just saw how gatekeeping of most kinds, clearly does not work. I think a healthy movement would be talking about this again, not necessarily saying, oh yeah, praising Nick Fuentes, not at all. We need to understand, look, this guy has followers, however important they are to the larger right, whatever. We need to talk to them. We need to pull them over to our side. And that I think truly is the main takeaway. Whatever you think about, what Kevin Roberts said, what's going on at Heritage now, I would certainly agree with Ryan that he is by far, I think, the best president that they've had in a long, long time. But I just think, as a healthy movement, we need to have debate. We need to have discussions, and that's the only way I think we can grow and set a good foundation long term.
Well, I definitely think this matter of audience size and audience influence is perhaps the stickiest one that has emerged. And I basically co-sign everything Ryan said, besides which my views on the Fuentes Tucker Roberts ascending triad or descending triad or whatever, all of that is like already out there in print, so I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on it here, except by association. My suspicion, and it's just a suspicion because these things, like Grok's guess, is as good, perhaps, or better than ours. My suspicion is that Fuentes has enough pull and cachet, and his people have enough pull and cachet that they could plausibly influence the future trajectory of the MAGA movement. And yet not enough appeal broadly to the public that a Fuentes-dominated MAGA movement would be politically successful at a national level. In other words, what that means is, besides my extreme dislike of the views that Fuentes is putting forward, and besides my conviction that they are not only morally ugly, but also wrong intellectually, quite apart from all that, it is to nobody's advantage that Fuentes and his following come to define or exert a major influence upon MAGA, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, etc. That would not win us any elections, just at a raw kind of numbers level. And so then the question really does become the one that Mike raised, which is, what do you do with this sizable but ultimately capped group of people? That is, there's a group of people that is large, to me troublingly large, but also that I think has a very serious ceiling among normies. How do you speak to those people? And I've been thinking about that because, you're right. Like, anything that sounds like denunciation without argument is likely to backfire. And one of the things about Tucker's interview with Fuentes that I found particularly insidious, actually, was not the stuff about organized American Jewry, which I know to expect from Fuentes, and which is, I think, kind of disqualifying from the jump. But it was the part at the beginning where Tucker walked Fuentes through his own personal trajectory from being sort of a MAGA college student, a red hat wearing college student, to feeling aggrieved because he was being shut out of the conservative movement because, from his own perspective or in his own self-presentation, he was, quote unquote, just asking questions. Now, I think there's a lot more to the story of Fuentes than that. And I certainly think that at this point, he's not just asking questions. He's actually putting forward a systematic anti-Jewish position. But what I found particularly concerning about that part of the video is that it was clearly designed to outline a trajectory that somebody might take. In other words, you might follow me, Nick Fuentes, from the position of being a MAGA supporter to realizing that it's really the Jews who are behind all of this. And so we're talking to, or thinking about talking to, people who might be led down that path. And what we want is to prevent them from becoming our blue-haired liberals. That is, from becoming a contingent of people that hold an extreme fringe view that is adjacent to kind of the MAGA view, in such a way that outsiders conflate the two and want nothing to do with any organization or individual or group that would put this stuff forward. So in the same way that, like, normies look at the left and they see it captured by these wokesters and they think, this is completely alien to my concerns and is clearly the point of view of somebody who doesn't know how to operate sanely in the world. I think an outsider will look at a Fuentes-dominated right and say, these guys are crazy. I don't want anything to do with this. Here's my thought about how to avoid that outcome. Anti-Semite is two things. The word anti-Semite is two things. It's a pejorative and it's a description of a point of view or a philosophy. The Fuentes gambit depends on a slippage between those two things. And it's made worse by the fact that there is a slippage between those two things as part of the general slippage between pejoratives and descriptors that the left has created via cancel culture. The word racist means something. It's also a word that leftists hurl at people when they want to delegitimize real, meaningful arguments. In much the same way, the word anti-Semite means a person who is prejudiced against Jews and thinks they have no place in American life or perhaps life generally. It's also a pejorative that, like, the Anti-Defamation League hurls at folks that are actually just putting forward normal conservative views. At this point, I think the onus is on us to refrain from whatever impulse we might have to get kind of emotionally wrapped up in this discussion and demonstrate and argue convincingly that the point of view that Nick Fuentes is putting forward, and I think that Tucker is really now courting or cozying up to, is definitionally anti-Semitic, and it is therefore wrong in every sense of the word. Fuentes talks about wanting to execute perfidious Jews. He talks about the Holocaust having been overblown, right? He talks about all these things that are factually incorrect as well as morally wrong. And I think, like, it's not that hard to say in plain, unemotional terms. It's not just Washington's letter to the synagogue that lays this out. American Jewry has been a part of a minority but significant part of American life and has contributed in a major way to this country since its founding. Jewish people hold a variety of views, but some are pro-Israel, some are critical of Netanyahu's Israel. Right? These are kind of basic things that we can and should say on the right, while also allowing that there are some people who will not be persuaded by those things because what's actually at the core of their point of view is hatred for Jews. And I think once we've laid out the serious argument for why it's not in our political advantage, nor is it intellectually valid to hate and despise Jewish people or to suspect them of a massive cabal, once we've laid that out, if there's some portion of people that still thinks, well, I want nothing to do with a pro-Jewish or pro-Israel movement anyway, those are not people that I want to be associated with. So at that point, I'm kind of comfortable, like, parting ways with those people. But I think there are many fewer of those people out there among the normies than the hardcore Fuentes groypers would like us to believe. End rant.
Yeah, it's why I've resisted in recent years getting too worked up about this, because I don't know, maybe I suppose some of our friends on the right would say this is a misplaced comfort that I have for myself, but it's what you just laid out, Spencer, that there's really not much of a political constituency for anti-Semitism in America, true anti-Semitism in America, or a party that represents it, or a component of that party. And I would submit, too, that the bigger problem of anti-Semitism is on the left, partly the product of immigration policy over the last 30 years of importing folks from countries where hatred of Jews is much more the norm, coupled with the left's ideological objections in sort of anti-colonialist garb to the state of Israel. And everyone knows all the tropes about this. You know, it's apartheid, et cetera, et cetera. So the more toxic brew is on the left, and I think it's a larger movement on the left. And the Democratic Party has shown. I mean, we're recording on Election Day. New York is about to elect a Muslim communist to be its mayor. And he got the endorsement of most of the organized Democratic Party, or the silence of the others.
This is very important context. Yes, I think that's totally true.
So that's, I think that should occupy more of our attention, while we shouldn't look away from the problem. It's not even fair to call it on our right flank, because that's sort of, is Fuentes on the right?
That is another. He told everyone, because everyone says, "Oh, no enemies to the right," right? When you start talking about this, and
he told everyone that Trump is a fraud and they should vote for Kamala last time. So, and also, I should point out too, for fans of this administration and the vice president and the president, Fuentes also has had very nasty things to say about J.D. Vance as well, that I really don't even want to repeat, including running down his wife and calling him a race traitor for marrying someone who's not white. So That also, so the other side of that part of it too, not just the anti-Semitic part of Fuentes' shtick, but the rest of it, or a good portion of it, also very unappealing to most normal American voters of any stripe, I think, but especially in the GOP. Maybe, I guess some of our friends who've been more worked up about the last 4 days than some of us have would say you're misjudging the extent of the problem. Fair enough. I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but I think that's how we ought to orient ourselves, especially when, the stakes are pretty high for coming elections.
It is really funny that the three of us who have spent so much time on this podcast talking about how the political categories we inherited from World War II and the Cold War are outdated and conditions have radically changed and it's no longer really useful to apply those old templates to modern conditions. It is funny that we now find ourselves amidst Nazis and communists. Like, can't we at least get some new kooks? But there is it's something about that Mamdani comparison, which is, to me, all the more reason not to give up that advantage by mainstreaming Fuentesism. In other words, if it becomes the case that Fuentes gains a stranglehold over the American right at like a serious political level, then we don't actually have that claim that we can now make, which is like, yeah, okay, we're having this internal dispute about people we find abhorrent, kind of quote unquote on our side or in our circles or adjacent to us. But the other side is literally electing a guy that tweets from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. Like, that's really happening. And it's going to have real political consequences that will be disastrous for a major American city, potentially further on from that, also down the line, if this becomes a viable left-wing kind of a viable way forward for the Democrat Party, let's say. But I think we just definitely don't want to go down that road on the right, especially when we are ascendant, not because of Nick Fuentes, like not because the Groyper revolution was so effective in reelecting Donald Trump, as you say, Ryan. In fact, it was arguably a detriment. It was arguably a hindrance in the 2024 election. But instead, because Trump positioned himself in a place that commanded widespread appeal among people who have never even heard of Nick Fuentes or maybe even watched Tucker Carlson, right? It was because the left had so thoroughly siloed itself among its extremists that Donald Trump then became the candidate of the big middle, which is now emerging and has continued to make itself known in the wake of his victory, right? And I think if Mamdani wins, you'll know by the time you hear this that the left is really going to run further in that direction. Like, for all their silliness and so-called retrospectives and internal disputes, sort of as we predicted, they've concluded that the only thing to do is decide that it is the children who are wrong and double down and define themselves in terms of the most energetic coalition in their party, which is this young, weird fusionism of wokeism, communism, and like anti-Semitic or anti-Israel or just kind of like racially motivated Islamism. So yeah, like if that's going to be the Democrat Party's play, it would be very, very foolish of us to squander the opportunity, or J.D. Vance, I should say, to squander the opportunity to basically carry the Trump ecumenism forward. And I do think that, like, in that way too, the Groypers are kind of our blue-haired liberals. Like that they will mess that up for us if allowed. But yeah, I mean, do you guys think Mamdani can all lay our chips on the table now, since we'll then be proven right or wrong by our listeners? Do you think he's going to win?
Yeah, I mean, every poll I've seen, I think the 2 weeks ago, maybe I looked at, Real Clear Politics. What's the average? I mean, he's up by 17%, I think, so it's not close. I think it's going to be a blowout. And I think with him, no, I think pointing to immigration, it's like, look, if you want to have, a decent politics, I mean, you cannot be keeping, people coming in from countries in which views like Mamdani's are totally, absolutely legitimate, quote centrist. I mean, that's how you stop that. And I think too, just looking at the views of just younger people in general, and this is something else that we have to definitely deal with, I think, going forward in some way, shape, or form, even if people aren't directly listening to Fuentes. So Ben Domenech had a really good column in The Spectator recently, and he just had a kind of compilation of polls where the younger generations are at. So there was a Harvard-Harris poll that found last month that nearly half of Generation Z respondents support Hamas over Israel. More than a third of millennials share their views. There's a Gallup poll in July, those between ages 18 to 34. So support for Israel's military actions in Gaza and Iran to just be 9% and 15% respectively. There's a Quinnipiac survey that showed strong majorities believing it is America's interest to favor Israel. That had fallen from 69% in December 2023 to 47% today. So I think we definitely have to acknowledge those things, even in, like, say, the evangelical world. I mean, there's definitely a shift away, I would say, from younger generations to certain theological commitments to the modern state of Israel, away from those. Dispensational theology has something to do with that. And obviously there's Christian Zionism. I mean, definitely predates that by a long, long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. You just look at, say, the Reformed tradition, how they interpreted Romans 11, and that it had to do with ethnic Jews as well. So that's actually a lot more complicated than I think a lot of the discussions around that can be. If we just eliminated dispensationalism, it would all go away. No, there's a lot more to it. So I just think, given the state of, especially where younger voters are at, I mean, this is something we have to contemplate. I mean, the fissures obviously have been there for a long time, and they just have, tectonic plates have really shifted a lot with this interview, and then with the Kevin Roberts situation. But this is, in 2028, I mean, this could be one of the, main fissures that I think that the right has to deal with. And obviously, just given kind of the situation right now, I think there's quite a bit of work to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I suspect that there's not much polling out there. You guys did a nice rundown, or you did, Mike, with the aid of Grok, of Fuentes' possible audience. But someone should really poll, have a detailed poll, I would say, from Gen X all the way down to, take a swath of the whole population. Why not do it generation by generation? Just especially for the right, just to get a picture of what we're dealing with. Because if we don't know where we are or whether we're tending, it's hard to know what to do. So my plea is that somebody ought to do that. I've told our chairman maybe he could do it. He could certainly commission such a thing. Maybe we'll get some more information about it. Well, I think that's enough on this contretemps. Maybe there'll be more to talk about next week. Maybe it will have blown over. Not sure. So we want to talk about Arctic frost. I want to know who names all these.
It sounds like a flavor of C4, like an energy drink. Right. Arctic frost.
It's funny that, yes, this is Celsius energy drink. Is that C4? Yeah. It's funny that that's also a genius name, because it's the name for this sophisticated and very powerful explosive as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Operation Arctic Frost. My ex post about this 5 or 6 days ago, before the right was consumed with this question of that we've been discussing, was, you take Arctic Frost with Crossfire Hurricane, the images of those two things combining, and it's is it a perfect storm of government corruption? I don't know, but I said you could take either one of those on their own, and they'd be a bigger scandal than Watergate. I just want to read, just for folks who, I mean, people sort of know about this, but it's I found a pretty short article that can encapsulate it for us, just to catch everyone up. The House Judiciary Committee. This is from Tampa Free Press, which I suspect is one of these. I used to know this media landscape better, but I suspect it's one of these regional right-wing funded operations. But again, don't quote me. One of my favorite quotes here on this podcast to indemnify myself from errors. The House Judiciary Committee alleged Tuesday that the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Arctic Frost probe, initiated during the Biden administration, potentially targeted more than 150 Republican officials and allies. Newly released documents provided to the committee reportedly offer insight into the scale of the investigation, which the committee claims was run by the Biden-era Department of Justice and FBI. The probe allegedly began under FBI Director Chris Wray and was later continued by Special Counsel Jack Smith and under Attorney General Merrick Garland. Evidence released by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley reportedly suggests that Wray, Garland, and then Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco approved the investigation to launch, which focused on actions surrounding the 2020 election and the Capitol riot. The committee, led by Republican Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, claimed that 45 individuals were potentially under investigation, including Steve Bannon, Republican Pennsylvania Rep. Scott Perry, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, Jeffrey Clark, and our friend and colleague John Eastman. The GOP-led committee further alleged that another 111 individuals were also potentially under investigation, listing names such as White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, Senior Advisor for Trade and Manufacturing Peter Navarro, current DOJ weaponization czar Ed Martin, former DOJ official Jeff Rosen. A September 2022 document reportedly included the names of dozens of activists, alleged electors, public officials, and government workers tied to events surrounding the 2020 election. And then they cite Just the News to summarize. May 2022 FBI emails reveal a Washington field office official thanking multiple regional offices for their assistance with Arctic Frost interviews. Another official stated, quote, everything connected to the probe is restricted within FBI systems. The Arctic Frost team reportedly requested about $16,000 from DOJ Public Corruption Unit for June travel to carry out over 40 interviews, serve subpoenas, and conduct multiple device search warrants. These efforts reportedly targeted numerous GOP-linked officials across 8 states: Arizona, Virginia, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and New Mexico. The documents also revealed internal threat tags used by the FBI for this investigation, including fraud, corrupt, and P-corrupt camp. I don't know what that means. Doesn't matter, really. And finally, the revelations follow recent allegations of coordination and monitoring related to the probe. A Senate Judiciary Committee press release suggests that emails reveal coordination between the Biden White House counsel's office and an anti-Trump FBI agent to secure phones belonging to Trump and former Vice President Mike Pence. Furthermore, FBI Director Deputy Director Dan Bongino, recently alleged that Special Counsel Jack Smith monitored the phone records of multiple GOP lawmakers, including Senators Josh Hawley of Missouri and Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, indicating the probe's broad scope. So, interesting development. I like to take the two together because they're slightly different. I mean, Crossfire Hurricane was an attempt, really a collusive attempt between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the outgoing Obama administration to ensnare the incoming Trump administration. Well, first to defeat his candidacy or defeat him in the election. When that didn't work, it shifted gears to try and stymie his efforts to govern. Now that if we were on the other side and were to grant that the Capitol riot on January 6th was an insurrection, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Civil War. That's kind of Biden's line and others' lines about it, which we don't. But if we were, then maybe it'd have a little more of a patina of legitimacy. But they both look a lot to me like one major party who is disproportionately the party controlling, at least by partisan identification, the permanent apparatus of the bureaucracy, that is the Democratic Party, using the power of the state to try to defeat Donald Trump, not once, not twice, but 3 times, either at the ballot box or going into or undermining his effectiveness should he come back to office. This seems to dwarf Watergate to me. Maybe each one by itself doesn't quite dwarf Watergate. Both together certainly do. And my question is, I think the Nixon consensus is starting to break down. I've talked a little bit about this with our friend Nathan Penkoski, who's written about Nixon quite a bit, and we've mentioned this years ago on the podcast. There is a pretty close connection between the permanent state's response to Nixon and to Trump, or at least to Nixon in his incoming and then early developing second administration, where I know some of our friends on the right don't think this is true, but our friend John Marini pointed this out long ago. Nixon was planning in the second administration to really kind of not kill the bureaucracy, but to bring it back under presidential control, even though obviously he expanded at least the executive side of that bureaucracy in the EPA and other ways in his first administration. But having secured one of the biggest landslides in American history for his reelection, he was neutralized within a couple of years. So that's how to view all these things. One last thing, what's certainly breaking down, maybe just for partisan reasons at the moment, but it's right and proper that it does break down, is this myth that really only existed post-Watergate, that the DOJ is somehow independent, but in the executive branch. It's certainly not how the founders thought about federal law enforcement or even execution of the laws. I mean, the older understanding was that the President of the United States, not the Attorney General, was ultimately the chief law enforcement officer in the country, at least to the extent that he's the one authorized by oath in the Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So I hope we continue to probe. These investigations are overdue, and I'm not quite sure what the solution is. I think you have to hold some of these people accountable, and we've seen some of that, even if they're not all directly related to Arctic frost, with the indictments of Comey and others.
So I just think of that famous Leonard Skinner quote in Sweet Home Alabama, Watergate does not bother me much. So I'm glad to see kind of the revisionism coming out. I mean, Nathan Penkoski, his pieces have been great. John Marini, obviously, like you said, has been working on this for a long time. Actually, last year, it was during the Lincoln Fellowship. I think Glenn Elmers, who teaches most of the classes, he talked about a new book by Jeff Shepard, The Nixon Conspiracy, Watergate, and the Plot to Remove the President, which actually I got for Christmas. I've not read it all the way through, but I would highly recommend reading it. It's just like anything else where the narratives that the media spun that, you kind of, that are just in the air that, you're just kind of led to believe are so far from actually the truth. So I think unraveling, what actually happened in Watergate, what Nixon was trying to do, actually, put the bureaucracy under the thumb of the executive again, under the president, like what the founders certainly wanted. This idea of independent agencies is just, totally bunk. That really comes from, really 20th century, New Deal era Supreme Court decisions. So I think that's all a very good thing. And I think what's happening here in Arctic frost, you have Crossfire Hurricane, you have all these, Jim Comey, director of the FBI. You have what happens when it's, government by the consent of the bureaucracy. You have multiple investigations being opened. You have basically what looks to be the permanent government going after their own enemies and basically trying to overturn the consent of the governed. So these are serious regime level issues that, Chuck Grassley, fortunately, is looking at this more and more and more. Kimberly Strassel, actually at the Wall Street Journal, had just a great kind of feature about it. Just kind of going through just the basics. It looks like that they went after 8 senators, 1 representative. The representative was Pennsylvania Rep. Mike Kelly, and they were looking for phone data from January 4th through January 7th, and basically it was, when did they make calls? To whom did they talk with? And this was all about, January 6th, trying to get information on that. So this is good that we kind of know the scope more and more and more. Obviously, January 6th itself, we're knowing more and more and more about what went on there. And that, the knowledge of what the bureaucracy is doing, even with Trump in office, that these things are still going on, that this is going to need a sustained effort. I was just telling somebody about this where it's like, look, Republicans need to win again in 2028. They're going to need to win again. I mean, it's going to be 3-4 administrations back to back to back to back to really bring the bureaucracy under heel. And it's going to have to be presidents who obviously have kind of imbibed, the Claremont view, which I think is the correct view of the citizens' relationship to government and to who actually controls it. Are we just beholden to the bureaucracy, or does consent of the governed actually matter? And so that's what this really points to ultimately is, we the people, or, does the bureaucracy lead?
I agree. I can't, even in my most trollish moments, I can't bring myself to endorse a Trump third term. But the institutional continuity and memory that
we should state that Trump has thrown cold water on it.
It's true. Yes, he will admit that he was kidding around. And I do enjoy his general impulse to just never let his enemies rest by constantly suggesting the thing that would drive them most insane. But that was one that actually would have driven me insane. So I'm glad he's walked it back. But the points you make, Mike, about institutional continuity, one of the things that the bureaucracy has done for the progressive left is it's created a permaclass of governors, people who are running the government regardless of who's in power. And as we've discussed at great length, and scholars of this subject know much more about it than I, and have talked to us and written for us about this, this installation of bureaucrats resists Republicans and favors Democrats. And so they act as a permanent leftward drift, kind of like a tide under the feet of the government. No matter what the people choose in their various elections, there is always this one-way ratchet, or this whatever metaphor you want to use. And in order to roll that back, since it's been accreting for years and years, you do need, I think, sustained, vigorous effort over a long period of time. So another reason why we should not just be thinking about Trump 2025, but also Vance or whoever 2028 and down the line, what the actual priorities are for the future of this movement. And this surely has to be one of them, because it is kind of the sine qua non. It's the thing without which you can't get anything else done. Unless we have a Republican form of government assured, all of the other policy agenda items that we might have, or discussions and disputes that we want to have, are going to be dead on arrival. And I think the Democrats and the partisans of bureaucracy also know this. I think this is why you're seeing the outsized hysteria about Trump as a dictator, as an autocrat, as a king, as a totalitarian. It's because he's acting like a president. He's behaving as if the people elected him to carry out their will, or to execute the law as the head of the executive branch. And that looks to many on the left like kingship or autocracy, because it is overthrowing the power of this unelected bureaucracy. That whole system does have to be delegitimized and dismantled. And these sorts of scandals are helpful, I think. I worry they are a little bit obscure for the public to really grasp. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but they have a bit of a feel of Hillary Clinton's emails, which were so arcane that by the time you explained, I guess those did have an effect on the election, but they were kind of difficult to make clear. Similarly here, what's gone on is appalling by all accounts, and should have the weight of a Watergate, but probably won't in the end for media reasons, and also because everyone is so dug in now already. But it's interesting to see in this Arctic frost scandal the extent to which those involved hoped that they could turn January 6th into a magic word, the way that Watergate has been turned into a magic word, right? It doesn't matter what was done to unseat and delegitimize Nixon because Watergate. And that word, which not that many people even know anymore, kind of what happened, it just is cited as exhibit A of why when Republicans get too much power, things get very bad. And January 6th was a very prime candidate for that kind of treatment, especially under Biden. I think a lot of Democrats hoped they could take that indeed quite concerning event, this one episode, and turn it into the Reichstag fire, right? This was this thing that you could just mention and it would justify any abuse or any suspension of norms, constitutional constrictions, etc. And you see them operating that way in these files, right? It was because January 6th happened that they thought anybody even critical or skeptical of the 2024 elections probity at any level could be the object of surveillance and FBI persecution, really. I mean, so that part of it, and the fact that these guys were, nobody involved in this was actually involved in January 6th, but it was clearly the background of it, just makes this really nakedly corrupt. And yeah, I hope that it will land, but more than that, I hope that this kind of unaccountable power continues to be a main object of the second Trump administration. That dismantling this is what Trump really ought to be about if he wants to leave a serious legacy and set things up for the next Republican president.
Yeah, well put, Spencer. We can move on to culture to fish out the episode. I when I was contemplating my recommendation for today, I had a bit of misgivings, or some misgivings, because I keep just quoting old stuff that I rewatch. So I've got to consume some new stuff soon. Otherwise, people are just going to peg me.
You're going to become like a large language model trained on its own data, right?
Yeah,
and just get deranged.
But I am rewatching and enjoying immensely the. It's sort of fitting right after Halloween, I guess. The spooky but atmospherically and aesthetically very intriguing and compelling first season of True Detective, and the performances by Woody Harrelson and especially Matthew McConaughey, and the general suspense and of that story is pretty amazing and holds up quite well. And they pulled something off pretty well, which is to take it's sort of a look back in interviews. That's the setup premise of now an aged and back to drinking on his day off, including in the interview, Matt McConaughey with a kind of handlebar mustache and looking older, and then a slightly more heavy set, probably through bodysuit or something, around the midsection, Woody Harrelson. And it's just a wonderful piece of art. So I recommend, if you haven't watched it, it's worth your time. I think I mentioned before, I have a soft spot for season 2 of True Detective, but really the GOAT of True Detective seasons is still the first one. And my soft spot for the second one is that it's set in Los Angeles and has a great performance from Vince Vaughn, but it's not quite as tight as the first season. I should just explain my hat too. I'm not a Palantir shill. This is their stock symbol. I just forgot to grab some sort of Claremont Institute hat when I went to the gym this morning, from which I leave and then come to the office. So all you guys get is Palantir.
I have a question for our audience and also for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Because since you've described your appearance, and we should remind people that we are on video and you can watch us at the Claremont Institute's YouTube site. But people on the comments last week said that you in particular looked totally different than they expected you to look based on your voice. And I just really want to know what they expected you to look like. So if you could this time in the comments write to let us know what you thought Ryan should look like. I don't know if that's
it's like a version of the phenomenon of listening to yourself being recorded.
Yes.
It's always a little jarring. So it's just another version of that, which is, and we've all experienced it, right? You listen to someone talk for a long time and then you finally see them and you go, is not the mental image I had, conjured in my head.
No,
so,
it's especially funny when you have watched some cartoon like K-pop Demon Hunters. The like incredibly handsome boy band is played. One of them is played by this kind of schlubby guy in his little recording studio. So there's I mean, I don't know what kind of what I want to find out from the audience is what kind of person does your voice belong to, Ryan? That is not the person that you are.
Yeah. I'd like to be a little taller. That's one of my main complaints.
Yeah, but people say that to me a lot. I thought you'd be taller. Oh well. I'm just barely over 6 feet tall, but that's what these days that's short.
Yeah.
My question for you, Ryan, is
go
ahead.
Well, go ahead.
Is should I abandon season 1 of Slow Horses and watch True Detective? My folks love True Detective and are always recommending it to me. Or should I keep with Slow Horses and then go back to True Detective? I've never seen True Detective.
It depends on the mood you're in for entertainment. I mean, it is a dark tale of suspense and murder, and really leans into it. Sort of, as I said, aesthetically, it's sort of hauntingly beautiful, but pretty. It's not a great picture of human nature.
Yes.
So it's odd for me to say that Slow Horses, a movie about intrigue and spying and terrorism and all sorts of stuff, is much more uplifting.
Well, it has Gary Oldman in it, so it's hard to be too depressed.
Constant comic relief.
Exactly.
Yeah. But so, what are you consuming?
Well, I have been sticking with the latest season of Great British Baking Show. So I guess I could use some dark murder to leaven my cuddly sort of cozy feelings.
Even out the palate.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a little balancing act. I'm very excited because some of our listeners, every time I say this is a kind of left-wing piece of art, but it's actually really good, they get very pissed off. So they're really going to hate me for this one. I can't wait to read all the angry comments about Ian McEwan's new novel, What We Can Know. McEwan is the author of Atonement, which is probably his most famous book, but he's prolific and celebrated author. I think justly celebrated because his prose, while very understated and some might even say flat, is in fact powerful in the extreme. His best book, in my view, is still Machines Like Me, which is about artificial intelligence and robots, and there's a lot in there that actually was quite prescient, which should give you a flavor for the fact that he's, kind of a genre-bending novelist and likes to deal with current technologies and kind of imagine some of the moral questions they raise. I'm working my way up to saying that this novel, annoyingly, even to me, is framed, the premise of it is global warming has destroyed the earth. And so everything is different and the seas are aggressively rising or have risen aggressively. And so the world has radically changed. And there's been a series of cataclysms, including nuclear war. And all of this feels incredibly sanctimonious. And it's very, very difficult to ignore. On the other hand, one gets the feeling that it functions for McEwan more as a literary device than as a political statement. Maybe I'm being too nice to him because I want to be, but it's really about, the novel is about looking back into periods of history that are radically different from our own and how we can become connected and even immersed in other times and places and ways of life. And for the protagonist of the novel, that's our time is an unreachable past. So it's about looking at the present day, the early 2000s, as a kind of ancient history that's separated by this unbridgeable divide. Obviously, this is catnip to me because I feel that I live in the Athens of the 5th century BC as much as or more than I live in America, the 21st century AD. But it's just a great kind of thought experiment and a good reminder that sanctimonious leftists are also sometimes talented artists. And this is one reason why it's worth engaging with culture across a wide remit. So I hope, if I didn't already piss off all our listeners with whatever comments I had about Fuentes and Tucker. I hope that the vast majority of our listeners are now upset by something I've said on this podcast. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job.
So I just actually watched the first season of True Detective probably only a couple of years ago, and it's phenomenal. I mean, the two leads, Matthew McConaughey's best performance. I mean, it has to be by far. Woody Harrelson did an outstanding job, so I would highly recommend that. So it's actually my birthday on the CRB dinner, so November 6th. So actually, this past weekend I was at my in-laws' early birthday celebration. One of the books I read, which actually I meant to get last year, and it was on my radar and then off. So Alex Van Halen, who's the drummer of Van Halen, brother of Edward Van Halen, my favorite guitarist of all time, wrote a book called Brothers, and just about their time, growing up in Holland. They came over on a boat with their dad, and just how did they turn into one of the biggest rock and roll bands of all time. So it's a great read. Alex has obviously tons of insight. There have been tons of books written about Van Halen from people on the outside, but Van Halen as a band and as an institution is famously very kind of a secluded thing. You didn't really know a lot about what was going on the inside. Why did you not hear from them? Kind of like Willy Wonka almost. You didn't hear from them for like years, and all of a sudden a new album would be out. Like, what was going on? What happened with David Lee Roth leaving in 1985, and just drama and then silence. So what happened? What's their story? So it's a very quick read, probably about 200, 40 pages, something like that. But very entertaining, especially if you like Van Halen, especially if you like just that era, 70s and 80s. Heavy metal isn't quite the right word, even though people want to describe them that way, but hard rock of some kind, definitely. I think the heavy metal connection is one of their favorite bands was Black Sabbath. They actually went on tour with Black Sabbath, and Black Sabbath was actually the headliner, but Van Halen came out first every night and pretty much blew them away, and it wasn't even close. And even the members of Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi, I think, admitted to that later on. And they were just kind of awed at how talented the whole band was, especially Edward on the guitar. But it's called Brothers. Came out, I think, late last year. But if you're interested in kind of a different kind of read, I would definitely recommend it.
Sounds like a good Christmas present for your metal-loving Gen X acquaintance or even older millennial.
Especially dad rock lovers out there.
Oh my gosh, you guys, I can't believe I have it. Maybe I should save this. Never mind. I have a dad rock recommendation. The non-dad on the podcast who's always ripping you guys for your dad rock. I have been getting his dad rock, but I'll talk about it next week. So tune in.
Yeah. I will say it's just so fresh in my mind. One of the great joys of having more than one child is that you have siblings. And at a certain point, depending on the age gap, mine are 4 years apart. One is almost 3, and our daughter's almost 3, and our boy's almost 7. They discover that they can have a lot of fun together. So they were both, and because of stupid fall back, when you're pre-children, you like falling back because you get an extra hour of sleep. Post-children, the first day was fine, but then it keeps falling back every day. So they were both up at 6:30 yesterday morning, and then they were both up at 5:30 this morning. And we were sort of half awake because we could hear the two of them rocking out in my son's bedroom and dancing around, which is pretty adorable. So if you can, have more than one child, because they're so much fun together, at least for a period of time. My sister and I are 3.5 years apart. We were pretty close until she became a preteen, and then we hated each other until I went away for college. And now we've been quite close ever since. So the joys of siblings. Anyway, that is it for us today. So thank you all for once again listening to and watching the Roundtable podcast. If you want to learn more about Claremont's work, as always, go to claremont.org. If you'd like to support it, as many of you do, thank you. Go to claremont.org/donate. Go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com for the latest from our flagship magazine, AmericanMind.org for your favorite debates in pixels rather than print. And go, of course, to dc.claremont.org to find out what we're up to in the nation's capital. Please pass around word of this show, either on YouTube or wherever you consume podcasts. Rate it, spread the word. Hopefully we'll continue to grow. And thank you all for listening and watching. We will talk to you next week.